I was a saver rather than a spender. I had the view that I would want to put my money into property. But there was a school of thought at the time that this type of approach was, in terms of protecting deposits and giving renters more rights, was a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But 20 years on, it's still here. It's being rolled out elsewhere. The build-to-rent market, as much as I encourage it, actually makes up a tiny percentage of the overall housing in the United Kingdom. What we need in order to increase the number of homes is to make sure they add to the net supply of housing, right?
Hello, my name is Ben Wilson, the host of the Developers Club podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ben Beadle, the CEO of the NRLA, the National Residential Landlords Association. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thank you for coming. So Ben, you've been in the property sector for 2 decades now in many guises. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into it and your roles that you've had?
Well, firstly, you're making me sound very old, as I'm still a spring chicken, obviously.
Yeah.
I fell into property. Probably like a lot of people do. I'd always had an interest in property, dropped out of university, worked in property management, got myself up the ranks, got a job at the tenancy deposit scheme using that sort of property experience. Started off doing adjudication, went into membership, became a director, did all sorts of fabulous and interesting things. Went to work for a housing association, Places for People, looked after some of the biggest institutional landlords in the UK. And then I got this job and haven't really looked back since.
Fantastic. And so let's take it right back to when you were, just past your teenage years, really. I understand you were first a landlord when you were 20.
Yes.
It's very, very young, impressive age to be a landlord. So how did that come about?
Well, I used to play football. I used to be a football referee, and I used to... Well, I'd
in adjudication.
Well, there you go. I clearly got issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was a saver rather than a spender. And I always had the view that I would want to put my money into property. I bought a 1-bed flat in Uxbridge. I went past it the other day, actually.
Whereabouts in Uxbridge? I know it quite well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. I was an agent there many years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For Peter Roll.
Oh, Peter Roll, yeah.
Well, there you go. So you might know.
Yeah, indeed. So just off of Harefield Road, Pages Lane.
I know well, yeah.
Just by the Magistrates Court. So yeah, I bought a 1-bed flat there.
Nice.
And I did what most people kind of do. You save up, you buy another one, you remortgage, and before you know it, you've got a small portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you remember what you paid for that flat and what the yield was roughly?
138.
Those were the days, weren't they? Those were the days.
Yeah, well, yes, quite. I remember my rent initially was 725. People would do the maths on the yield, but yeah, I dread to think what the rent is now. It must be 1,200-1,300 quid easily in that area.
Yes, I would think so. Yeah, I think the yield's probably not what they once were.
No, quite.
So in terms of, obviously, a lot of our listeners and viewers will be younger property people sort of trying to get into the property world. What sort of advice would you give them about trying to get on the ladder at such a young age? How can they go about that, do you think?
Well, I think you've got to go into this stuff eyes wide open. We'll no doubt talk about regulation and all sorts of things later in the podcast, but it's not as easy as it once was. You've got many more barriers to entry, not least stamp duty, additional HMO duty, and of course the tax system is very, very different now for
5%. Yeah, charge.
Exactly. But also about what sort of vehicle you put that property in. Are you going to do it as an individual? Are you going to put it into a limited company? Where's your exit strategy? And then, of course, you then got to worry about compliance and all of that sort of stuff. So my advice to folk is, don't watch these property shows and think that you can do it. Well, obviously, get involved with the Developers Club, getting involved with NRLA, but actually, having a proper strategy about what your investment is, because it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and also from what you're saying, be a saver. Well, more important now than ever, really.
I think so. I had that instilled into me from a a very young age, and as a result, it meant I was a very boring teenager, for which my parents were grateful. But yeah, I think you do have to be. You've only got to look at house prices and mortgage rates at the moment. Cheap money, that era is long gone, and it's going to be a few years before it comes back.
And you're looking at 25% deposit, aren't you? Exactly, for the most part. So I guess for young people, they could probably look to go outside of London and buy something smaller at 50 to 100,000, perhaps up north or whatever, work their way up to buying in London or whatever more expensive part of the country.
And a lot of investors are looking in the sort of northeast because asset values are low, and that's an area that's really, really sort of thriving.
Absolutely. So you kind of touched on it, but how do you think it's changed in the last 20 years since you started out being a landlord?
It's got much more difficult, and it was never easy. It was never easy. But I think, we've got big changes afoot at the moment. We've also been the whipping boys for the best part of 2 decades as well. The pantomime villain, all of that sort of stuff. And so whether it's tax, whether it's regulation, whether it's the kind of rhetoric around home ownership and landlordism, it's much, much more difficult.
I would agree with that 100%. I think we'll come on to it later, but that's part of the reason why rents have gone up so much recently is because of all of the regulation changes and so on. So we'll come on to that. But just going back a little bit, you mentioned that you were working for TDS before. So what did that role teach you about the business?
Yeah, well, I mean, you in that role, you see it from both sides. You see what tenants are saying, you see what landlords are saying, and I'm very much of the view there's good and bad of all sorts, right? So you see a whole range of different things there. But the bit I most enjoyed about that role was not so much the adjudication, but kind of supporting the transition of professionalizing the sector. When I joined in 2008, deposit protection had only been in for a year. There was a lot for agents and landlords to kind of get to grips with. And that became, I guess, a test run for deposit protection on a mandatory basis, something we've needed to comply with for 17, 18 years now, but being rolled out into Scotland, into Northern Ireland, into Jersey, different types of scheme, insured and custodial, going through government procurement contracts and making sure that customers, renters, landlords, and agents are supported. It's a huge business now.
I had to use it once to my one of my landlords kept a deposit here. Ironically, he lived in a £5 million house in Totteridge, and eventually, because of the TDS, I did get my deposit back. So I'm an advocate.
Well,
I'm an advocate, but you get bad landlords and good landlords. Most are good, to be fair.
You do, but most people have got a story, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. People will say, well, why can't you be more bullish about, about talking up landlords? Well, I think we do as much as we possibly can. But like you, most people have had an experience or they've had a story, and kind of overcoming some of that negativity can be very, very difficult.
Sure, and I've equally had tenants that haven't paid me rent before, so it's kind of both sides, right? Isn't it? And it's like anything in life, really.
100%.
So with the TDS, what do you think have been the positives and the negatives of it coming in, if there are any negatives?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the sector doesn't particularly like regulation. I think there was a school of thought at the time that this type of approach was, in terms of protecting deposits and giving renters more rights, was a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But 20 years on, it's still here. It's being rolled out elsewhere. Like most things, people are getting to grips with it. And like your particular story, maybe sometimes it's needed. And I think that's how we end up with regulation. It's not necessarily protecting the majority. It's about actually safeguarding those on the margins and things like that. And that's why we see greater regulation coming in on renters' rights and energy efficiency and a whole myriad of things.
That's a good point, actually, that you are protecting those that need it the most.
100%. And I think that business stood me in good stead for this business as well, in terms of it being a not-for-profit organization. I guess deploying customer spend so that customers always feel a benefit back, And that's exactly what we do at NRLA. You know, we've got our membership subscription, but everything that we do goes back into supporting landlords, supporting the sector, whether that's, you know, last week, 4,000 contacts from members on our support line.
Wow.
I mean, that's huge. But
Is that typical or not?
It was a busy week. It was a busy-ish week, but typically we average about 3,200 contacts. So on a weekly basis, and that is just sort of that's the support,
like 150,000 a year. Huge amount.
Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
But the point there is that needs to be funded. Someone's got to pay for it, and if those contacts keep going up, what we can't do is load people up. We need to make sure we've got the right sort of people, the right sort of tech. No one particularly wants to talk to an AI, bot.
Not yet.
Not yet. Anyway,
enough yet.
As much as we are embracing all of those technologies, you want a knowledgeable person at the end of the phone, and that's the sort of investment we're able to make for members.
I see. Good. So, I mean, talking about the NRLA, it came about through the merger of the NRLA and the RLA.
That's why we came up with our wonderfully original.
But I know there's lots of acronyms. So, I mean, you oversaw that merger.
I did,
didn't you? So, what was involved with that, and why did the timing make sense to merge them together?
Yeah. Well, I guess our sort of founding fathers of both organisations had reached the point that they'd been competitors for a long time, and that sort of competitive edge could actually detract from kind of what you're offering to your core audience, landlords and letting agents. So I think it was right to say that the personalities at that time allowed that merger to happen. Happened I joined the business in 2019, October, November 2019. Didn't happen until about 6 months later in March 2020. But
you were the CEO then, were you?
Actually, I joined in anticipation of becoming CEO. So the existing CEOs were both still there of their respective businesses, which obviously brings a different challenge and dynamic. Right, good guys, thoroughly good guys. We're all friends, but it doesn't make it terribly easy. But this was about kind of making a bigger voice for the sector, for the private rented sector, but also I guess kind of leveraging our size, getting the best possible services, and really putting landlords and the PRS on a pedestal. Not for me to judge how well that's gone. It's for our members. All I can say is at the time we had 70,000 members. We now got 112,000 members and growing. Our members have got over 1 million homes. We've achieved some fantastic access with ministers, and really sort of being pragmatic about some of the issues of the day. The politics do not allow me to go in and talk up feathering our members' nests. That's not what it's about. It's about a sustainable private rented sector where landlords are part of the solution at a time of housing need and housing crisis. So being really pragmatic about how we position some of this stuff, taking our members' concerns, but translating it into really effective kind of policy tweaks and adjustments is what we do.
That makes sense, sure. And so in terms of the role of the NRLA, what is it you're doing to support landlords? We've touched on the fact that there's been a lot of changes in legislation and various other changes. What is it you're doing to help that?
Yeah, so part of it is making sure that our members' voices are heard. I frequently give evidence to sort of select committees and so forth that want to hear about the impact that regulations are going to have on the sector. So there's influence. We do a huge amount of research on members' behalf because, I guess particularly with the administration we find ourselves with at the moment, there's not a natural ally there. So we need to make sure that we have robust evidence around what's going on in the sector. We've got pragmatic policy solutions, but it's much more than that. It's about actually, I mentioned the 4,000 contacts that we're getting on a weekly basis. Landlords need help. We also need to provide, all the collateral for renters' rights, for example, that's coming down the track. We've got to prepare the sector for being able to comply with whatever government bring in, as well as offer sort of tangible solutions on kind of making the landlord journey much, much more simpler, I guess.
Yeah. And you touched on earlier about the perception of landlords. And I mean, what do you think the public's perception is of landlords today?
Well, I think much like
question.
much like my school report, probably could do better. I don't think we always cover ourselves in glory, which is frustrating. The weekend we had a big conference in Manchester where we had the deputy mayor of Manchester talking about the Good Landlord Charter, and of course, there's frustration from good landlords who see this sort of thing as being another thing that I need to comply with. But the reason regulation is brought in, as we touched on earlier, is because there are people out there that are not doing things the way that they should. And at a time of housing crisis, government has to kind of react to that. So I think there's certainly more that we can do as a sector to kind of talk up the good work that landlords, agents and the PRS does. But of course, we can't be tone deaf to some of the issues within it.
Sure. And I'm sure there's I guess you see there's quite a big difference between landlords that are actively trying to game the system and exploit people, and landlords that perhaps are just a bit ignorant to the changes that have come in and need a bit of a coercion, or not coercion is the wrong word, but a push to get them to where they should be.
Oh, and I guess, we're sort of, for those types of prospective members, sort of almost a rehab. Okay, well, you've made a mistake. We can help you put that right. But obviously the way that things are moving at the moment is that ignorance is really no excuse. If you've got an asset that you're renting out, I mean, there's
a lot of public information, isn't there? I mean, like this podcast, for example, there's loads of information out there now, isn't there?
100%. But there's also a lot of crap information out there, frankly. And so those landlords that are, Googling away and looking at old website. Well, you're running a business, and when you run a business, you've got to make sure you've got the proper resources and support to help you on that journey, so that you don't make mistakes. When the Renters' Rights Bill comes in, I think it's going to be very unforgiving for those sorts of landlords that have been under a
rogue landlord.
Yeah, 100%. And people say rogue landlords, don't they? But I always think of rogue of like the old boy in Heartbeat that used to go and rustle sheep, likable, but actually still a bit of a criminal. So what we have to do is to really work hard to professionalize the sector. And I think through membership, that's exactly what we're working hard to do. Our members provide over 1 million homes. They need support on a whole range of elements that they are doing, and we can provide that. Obviously, when new regulations come in, people have got to be prepared.
Absolutely. And in terms of misunderstandings about landlords, what do you think is some of the key in their defense, perhaps, where, I mean, a lot of people always assume, I think, that landlords have, 100 flats and are worth 50 million each. And actually, a lot of the time, it's people that have bought them as a pension investment. I mean, that is changing, I think, with the changes to sort of vanilla buy-to-let.
Quite.
But one misunderstanding I always find is that there are all these sort of super wealthy people. Sometimes they've just bought one flat, which they've taken some money out of their pension pot and put the deposit down, and they're 60 years old, about to retire, nice people, married with 2 kids. That's kind of quite often the case, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, your typical mom and pop landlord. We mustn't forget in the UK that 94% of properties are owned by individuals. So we tend not to have, I mean, it's growing. We do have institutional investment. We do have institutional providers, but actually the majority is owned by individuals. Now, that is one of the big misconceptions around wealth, and that's something that we have to defend time and time again. Actually, half of landlords are basic rate taxpayers.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good fact. And half of landlords are basic rate taxpayers.
29% are full-time employees, 11% are part-time, 14% are self-employed. The average age is 59. And so, I guess this is about the haves and the have-nots. It's about what's happening out there in society. And I think that there is a lot of frustration towards those people who might have more than one property.
We are quite a unique country in Europe, I think, because there's an Englishman's home is his castle, that old saying, but it's very much the case that in the UK, everyone's told you must buy a property. In Germany, France, it's very different. You have a lot more people renting, and they're much more heavily protected as tenants.
They are.
I guess we're moving sort of that European model to a certain extent.
I think
not quite that much, but
no, I think we are. I mean, certainly, government, it feels as though favour institutional investment. I can understand why they favour that, but like everything, there's good elements to the small landlord, and there's and bad elements, and it's the same with institutional investment too. And so we just I think what I'm trying to say is that we need housing providers of all shapes and sizes, and particularly at a time of housing crisis, what we don't want to do, and we know that government want to build 1.5 million homes over the course of this parliament.
Tricky.
Really tricky, and I think the Deputy Prime Minister has said that we're in touching distance of it. Well, that sounds to me like we're going to miss it. But what we actually need is all types of investment into the sector. We are totally at peace with the idea of more social and affordable housing. Why wouldn't we be? But it would make sense that we have a thriving private rented sector, and to that point, we need people to stay in it. We need people to have confidence, and we also need them to have confidence to invest in it as well. But I think, back to your original point, the wealth point is something that is
of us and them mentality.
Yeah, a little bit. And another stat that I've got before me is actually 51% of landlords received rental income of less than £20,000. So again,
per annum.
So we're not talking property tycoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we are talking, a top up of income. And what I would say to that is, actually, I see that type of, as long as you do it in a responsible and sustainable way, that type of property investment surely is a good thing. Surely.
I think so. You also think about the fact that if you've got an individual landlord with one flat, they're going to put their heart and soul, hopefully, in to make it look nice. It will have a bit of their character in it. Otherwise, you've got 500 that are owned by whether BlackRock or whatever, and 500 flats all the same. It's quite nice to have a little bit of differential between housing stock.
Exactly. And it is sort of the difference. Our members operate pretty much on a scattered portfolio basis, whereas you've got big institutional providers that want blocks all in one place. And that's fine. We can't be too picky. We need that sort of investment, because we've got 12 people chasing every available home. Rent
12 people now,
and I mean, at its height, it was double that. We've got rents that are coming down, but they've increased 7.5% in the year to May. So greater supply is something that can solve some of these problems.
I think what also didn't help is when COVID hit, we had probably a 20% reduction in rental values, more or less. Yeah, well, that's what I saw in London, where I operate, and then off the back of that, obviously they went up again 20% plus another maybe 10-15% more. So people were thinking, well, hang on, it's got up 35%, but actually it dropped 20, but it felt like 35, and so people were doubly upset, I think, because they'd had that, in their eyes, that double whammy.
100%. But if we look back at those COVID years, one of the pieces of research that we commissioned was I'm sure it was a YouGov survey of renters, and it asked renters what steps, with their living accommodation had they taken during COVID. And we elicited from that survey that where renters needed some support from their landlords, be it ending a tenancy early, reducing the rent, writing off the rent, payment terms, whatever, 4 out of 5, 80% of landlords came to some arrangement to keep, to either end the tenancy through agreement so they didn't have the financial liability, or took steps to kind of sustain that tenancy. That's just one example of many of where your small scale private investor is doing a bloody good job and getting very little thanks for it.
Absolutely. That definitely makes sense. And you touched on earlier about sort of governmental policy, always Winchester and in Cardiff as well. So how does the NRLA work to influence that policy that's coming out of those two institutions?
Yeah, so I mean, that it's heavily predicated on research and sentiment. So what are private investors thinking? What are they feeling? What are their movements going to be with their portfolio over the next year or so? But this is also, housing has so many touch points. So, yes, we can be in Parliament talking about renters' rights. Next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking the Select Committee on DWP, talking about local housing allowance, housing benefit, and how that kind of...
You just get called quite a lot to these things, I think.
Yeah. I mean, they obviously want to hear from landlords on these issues, which is a really, really positive step. I'd love it if they actually followed some of our recommendations.
You don't feel they do that, you?
So I
just put you on the spot. But...
No, you're welcome to. So I think we made a great dent on the renters reform bill under the Conservative administration. We achieved many changes to make it more palatable. We now have the renters rights bill, which is a very, very different proposition for landlords, and we're working very, very hard to get changes to that. But we have to remember what's achievable, and the Labour government have a 200 plus seat majority. They can be quite bullish on the thing. So as much as I'd like to see concessions around court reform and student tenancies and fixed term tenancies and things like that, we have to be realistic about what we can achieve.
Absolutely. I mean, and that brings me on nicely to a segue into what I was going to ask you about the current challenges that you see in the private rented sector and where things are heading. How do you see things going, I guess, in comparison to the last 20 years of being in things?
Yeah, so
in the industry.
So I think in terms of challenge, it'd be easy for me to talk about renters' rights, minimum energy efficiency standards, making tax digital in terms of specific pieces of regulation. But actually, I still feel that the overriding challenge is one of supply. Yeah. So you park those things aside for the time being. Actually, we need more homes of all sorts. We need to make sure that the sector is a viable place to invest, whether it's social, private, or whatever type of housing. I said earlier, we've got a dozen people chasing every available home. Rents aren't going to go down until we sort the supply challenges out. And whether it's renters' rights or minimum energy or whatever, it's doubly important to make sure that those things work for responsible landlords so that they have confidence around what they're investing in. I'd love to see government, with a properly regulated private rented sector, actually back that type of investment into the sector rather than have barriers like additional rate of stamp duty and things like that. We need far more carrot and less stick, far less.
Yeah. Well, I was at the TDC board meeting today, and one of the guys there was saying that private rental stock's down 18% from last year, that's pretty sizable. That is significant, and that's the reason why supply and demand prices are going to go up.
I mean, it's nothing more complicated than that. But some of the figures as well. If you look at the average number of properties that a letting agent is marketing, 13.
Yeah, I mean, which is not many.
It's overall.
Yeah. Indirectly, you might have 40 or 50. I mean, when I was an agent for 10 years, when I was an agent, I was in sales, but our lettings team would have anywhere from 40 to 100 properties plus short lets. And so it was just in London, so we had quite a few short lets, and we've just churned through them so quickly, and the whole thing's changed. I think a lot of it's changed in the last couple of years. So let's have a little chat about some of the changes and see what you think about them. So obviously there's been quite a lot of change with regard to Section 21.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Needed?
Whether it's needed or not, it's happening. Successive governments of all various colours have committed to removing Section 21. It's one of those sorts of unfortunate issues. I think that the conversation gets hijacked because I'm very much of the view, and my members are very much of the view that it's been termed no fault eviction, but landlords don't evict tenants willy-nilly. They do so very reluctantly, and Section 21 was one of those things that gave the sector confidence. It was brought in to give the sector confidence to say, well, bring your property to the market, and if you have a problem with your tenant, you're able to get a fast track to getting your property back. Now, dial forward to today. This is really only coming about because of the insecurity in the sector. So, why is the sector so insecure? It's because there's greater regulation coming in, there's punishing tax, there's no incentive to stay, but also landlords are getting older. Landlords are naturally coming to the end of their investment cycles, and so they're looking at selling off some of those units. And without new homes coming in, and without social housing being replaced for the last couple of decades, people have got nowhere to move to other than temporary accommodation when they get evicted.
it does feel to me like we're in a kind of we're in a sort of gap at the moment where you've got the old traditional buy-to-let, which is slowly tailing off with the changes that have been made. You've now got these great big companies, which we'll talk about in a minute, coming in and buying up thousands of units across the country and building build to rent's now a massive thing. 10 years ago, build to rent was in its infancy, really, wasn't it?
Sure. Well,
now it's really, everything's flying, really. So, but you're in a gap between the two. So I'm sure in 2 or 3 years' time, a lot of these units will start coming to the market.
yeah,
Hopefully.
I think that's right. But the build to rent market, as much as I encourage it, actually makes up a tiny percentage of the overall housing in the United Kingdom. There'll be landlords out there that think there's some big conspiracy theory about, big institutional investment coming in. I just don't see it that way. I just don't see it that way at all. I see it as being a welcome investment in, and yes, there will be some natural correction of people that decide to stay or decide to leave the private rented sector. But with such a significant composition, it's going to take several generations, in my view, to move the dial. And last year, the sector increased by 15,000 homes. So yes, we see a correction. Yes, we see maybe smaller landlords deciding to do something else and bigger landlords getting bigger. But we're seeing that at an individual level as well as an institutional level. Institutional investment or management firms now makes up the biggest number of companies on Companies House. I think there was an article a couple of weeks or so ago. It's the biggest business. So people are clearly incorporating.
Well, you talk about people think it's a bit of a conspiracy, but I think when you got to look at the fundamentals, there's obviously a massive lack of supply.
Yep.
You can deploy billions of pounds of capital quite quickly in large property development schemes.
Yep.
We live on an island with strict planning laws. Seems like a pretty good investment to me if I had 10, 20 billion pounds sloshing around. And that's why they're geting involved. I don't think there's any conspiracy there. It's just fairly common sense business.
It reinforces the view, and it stood the test of time, I think, that property is a pretty sound investment. Now, there'll be individuals out there.
Certainly long term, I think.
100%.
I think the days of 2-3 years and
no
20%, I think that's probably gone.
Unfortunately. I think that is long gone. If you're in it
from a buy-to-let perspective, I mean.
Yes. Yeah. But if you're in it for a 10, 15, 20 year period, as you say, perhaps as a pension, perhaps as a nest egg, whatever, then over that time you will ride out, market crashes and COVID and, those types of things. And it will still be a sound investment. And I think that's exactly what, bigger institutional money is finding.
So, I mean, that kind of answers my next question, which is to do with vanilla, in inverted commas, buy-to-let, as people seem to like to call it now.
Yeah.
So you still think it's viable to be a sort of vanilla buy-to-let investor? Yeah. You don't have to do serviced accommodation, HMOs. These are all the new
I mean,
preferred ways.
I think our members would have a fairly mixed portfolio, to be honest with you. So I think HMO,
which is always wise in any investment. You want to have diversity.
You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Absolutely, that's for sure. But I also think that landlords will be thinking about different opportunities. You mentioned HMOs, but things like supported living, for example.
Yeah, big market for that at the moment.
Really big market for that at the moment. And so. I think they would be open to sort of trialing new things. But I also think that, our members, whilst they might be your sort of vanilla buy-to-letters, would also have commercial property and other types of investment as well.
Sure. And that's what I was going to ask you. What's been changing in terms of the profile? Has it changed much, the profile of your membership? Or is it still much of a muchness, still residential?
Yeah, I mean, where it's changed is not so much kind of
well, of course, it's residential because you're the resident.
Yeah, so do. Well, you say that, but there's different elements within that people will dabble with.
My first cock up. Ben, we've spoken about professionalism and standards and the need to keep increasing them all the time. Tell me a little about the NRLA's accreditation and training work that you do.
Yeah,
so how's that having an impact?
Yeah, so training and accreditation is a big part of what we do. We don't just want to preach about what people can do. We want to make sure we've got tangible solutions, hands-on stuff that people can achieve. So whether that is accreditation or qualification, we've got over 5,000 accredited members, so they sit an exam and do their CPD. And
how long does it take to do that exam? Is it straightforward?
It depends how clever you are.
I know. If you're averagely clever, let's say.
You can have it done in a matter of a few weeks. And bear in mind that a lot of our
you study sort of
a lot of our members are not necessarily new to this sort of thing. But those new entrants into the market is a good way to know what you're coming into. And I think, we haven't shied away from the need to professionalize the sector. And so making sure that we've got not just sort of fundamental training on being a landlord, but actually more targeted stuff on things like, managing damp and mold, very topical at the moment.
Hugely topical.
Hugely topical, and going to be even more so with the implementation of Landlords law. That's just one example of many of how I think, we can really add value to membership and support our members. Our members get 20% off all of the training that we do, and
20%.
So, but also if you look at this area of the sort of education world, it's the sort of trap that you can fall into and pay huge amounts of money on a promise of becoming a millionaire overnight. You see some of these types of things. We're much more about practical support for sustainable renting, and offering sort of soft skills as well, because I think those sort of soft skills are going to be hugely important in terms of managing your customers going forwards.
So in terms of also the local authority and enforcement and licensing, how does that work, do you think? Does that help?
So
the licensing changes?
Licensing is a hugely sort of divisive issue, I think. At a personal level, I'm yet to see any kind of real benefit of licensing, to be honest. Well, I unfortunately, I personally feel that the licensing is really a way to fill local authority coppers.
Controversial.
Fact, in my view. Now, that's not to say that some licensing schemes are not needed, but I balk at the idea of pretty much borough-wide selective licensing. Selective licensing should be used in a very, very small number of postcodes to manage antisocial behaviour. And you mentioned earlier and put me on the spot about what we had achieved in terms of changes to regulation. Well, under the Renters Reform Bill, Michael Gove had committed to seeing how selective licensing would interact with the property portal, which is something that every landlord is going to need to put their property on in the new world. Now, that sort of double up is a real problem for me, and I'm all for bringing bad landlords to book, but pretty much borough-wide selective licensing plus a property portal, it's overkill. And this point about kind of encouraging people to come in the sector, stay in the sector, you need to make, it's not to avoid regulation, it's not to avoid scrutiny or to avoid doing things properly, but come on, you don't need both of these things. And that's where we have a problem with licensing schemes. Local authorities overreaching, charging excessive fees, landlords not feeling any benefit of that whatsoever, and being beaten over the head with it. So, but on the other side of the coin, we also know that local authorities are not using some of the tools at their disposal. Over half of local authorities have never issued a fixed penalty notice, and that just is indicative of some of the cuts that local authorities have seen. And so that's why I think this government needs to actually front load enforcement, invest in enforcement, so that bad landlords pay for kind of that sort of regulation, not the good ones.
So we've talked quite a lot about a regulation, but let's have a little chat about how the private rental sector is changing. So in particular, I'm a developer, obviously the Developers Club.
Right, there we go.
Tied into that. Developers build to rent. It's massive change over the last 5 or 10 years. Is this helping to raise standards, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is.
You do, yeah?
Yeah, I do.
But it's more professional.
Arguably, yeah. You've also not really got concerns about sort of landlords moving back in and selling up and things like that, right? So, and arguably, you might have those kind of big investors really properly in it for the longer term. So I can 100% see all of the benefits of that. But I think there's more overlap between landlords and developers than people often realise. I think we're both responding to the challenges that are out there in the sector. We want high quality homes, secure, well managed, that meet the needs of today's renters. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive in any way, shape or form. And one of the stats out in a report by Hamptons showed that just over a third of new homes across England had been sold in advance to investors and landlords, for example. So, there's quite an interesting mix of those folks.
And what do you think that landlords can learn from developers and developers from landlords?
So I think being more organised. So
landlords can be more organised.
I say not in terms of the day-to-day stuff, but sort of the more strategic planning side of things, knowing your area, knowing your customer, that's
repurposing things.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Which is something that developers do really, really well. We want
good developers, and they're not bad developers who don't.
Members of the developers club. There we go.
Well done. You can come back.
But both of those contributors are important. I just don't see them as mutually exclusive in any way, shape, or form. Some developers will be landlords. It's symbiotic relationship.
And we spoke earlier about the bigger players buying up lots of portfolios, and you looking forward to that happening, or you've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think about your BlackRocks and Lloyds coming in and buying thousands of properties?
We need them.
Doesn't make the well, absolutely. It would seem it would give us the supply that we need.
Yeah, that's right. I think Lloyd's sort of coming in and buying up properties is one thing. I think what we in any kind of investment, what we need in order to increase the number of homes is to make sure they add to the net supply of housing, right? I know there are landlords out there that are worried about this, but if you look at the demand before us today, government aren't. Let's say they do build those 1.5 million homes, and I hope that they do, right? Because it's exactly what we need. We want to encourage mobility from the private rented sector. We've got almost 1.5 million people on social housing waiting lists. We've got a record spend and a record number of kids in temporary accommodation. We need more homes, and I'm not really too fussed about where they come from. What I would like, though, is that as we see a more regulated private rented sector, I do think government needs to bring those investors along with them for the journey, because they can't do it alone. Those 1.5 million homes are going to take a few years to build and deploy. The trouble is, the need is kind of right now. Jam tomorrow is no good. What we need is now, and actually we need investors to feel valued, valued contributors towards the private rented sector. We need them to stay where they are, and we actually need a few more to come in. So what we desperately need is to get over this kind of rhetoric,
after the mentality, and work together.
100%, so important.
Well, that definitely makes sense. And we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present. And looking ahead, where do you see the private rental sector in the next 5 years, let's say, or in 5 years?
Yeah, I just see it as an integral part of housing supply and need in the UK.
Continuing to improve.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I do think there will be some corrections as kind of new regulation is brought in. There will be people that have had enough. I mean, there will be.
Like bringing anything, isn't it? It takes a little while for people to get used to it.
Exactly right.
And then you forget about it. It's just the norm.
It becomes the norm. And so, I don't want to be the boy that cries wolf, saying, oh, well, if you do this, everyone's going to leave and sell up. They're not. Some people are going to leave. Some people are going to stay. Yeah. And, some properties will be sold to bigger landlords. Others will be sold to first-time buyers. That's fine. The problem is that even after all of that, I still think I'm finding it difficult to see exactly where all of this supply is going to come from, unless we've got real pro-growth tax policies that are going to incentivize investment.
You don't think it would be a good idea if we were allowed to put residential properties in our pensions, actually, to let?
I think it would be a great idea. I don't see it.
That would be my way of improving the supply.
100%. I think that's one of a few ways that you can play with the tax system that's to incentivize investment. That's what
it would go wild, wouldn't it?
Well, but you know, it's gonna. I don't even think it would take a brave government, to be honest with you. But I don't know it will be this government that would do this type of thing.
We're talking about getting rid of the ISA allowance, right? Go on, aren't they? And that's going to have that will implicate the landlord market, I think, as well. It's a good way of saving for a deposit to buy somewhere, isn't it?
It is. But what we've got to make sure though is and recognise is that within the PRS, it does serve a really positive purpose. It's a great springboard to home ownership, and we want to encourage that. Really want to encourage that.
Absolutely, 100%. And just in terms of the NRLA, what does success look like under your leadership? You think what would that look like?
So I think it's about continuing to influence the agenda, make sure that the views of the sector are heard. I'd like to get some changes to minimum energy efficiency standards, renters' rights. We've also got making tax digital coming down the track, so we've got to prepare landlords for that. But I think, at simple level, I've been in the post for just over 5 years now. I want to continue to grow what we're doing. I want to represent more of the sector, different types of investor within the sector, and continue to grow. Nobody wants to be running a declining business, and happily I'm not. So people need to feel the benefit of membership even more, and we're absolutely committed to doing that.
Fantastic. Sounds like you've got a lot on your plate.
Sure.
Fun. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. Well, if you've been there 5 years, you must be enjoying it.
So life in the old dog, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm sure you're still young. So just sort of final reflections. I mean, what's the bit about your job you love the most?
Love getting out meeting members, hearing their stories, what makes them tick, and I like very much to be able to convey their concerns, whether that's to politicians, peers, or policymakers, but being able to really, I hope, cut through the noise and really kind of get that collective voice across in a really articulate, punchy, respectful way.
Fantastic. And in terms of networks and communities such as the Developers Club, what do you think? What value do they bring? Do you think?
Well,
keeping it on brand,
keeping it on brand.
Otherwise,
well, I've been to a lot of your events. They celebrate the best in the sector with their various awards, and it's also a great place to bring folk together. To learn from each other and support as well. So, I'm delighted to be involved as far as I can with the Developers Club, and I would absolutely encourage.
Well, we're happy to have you. And I mean, just one question about a bit of a wild card question. Where you're obviously in quite a privileged position, you see, all these different landlords where they're buying and so on and so forth. Where would you, if you had, I don't know, £1 million to invest somewhere, or let's say £150,000 to invest somewhere, where would you be looking to buy in the UK, do you think? Any particular areas that you think would be good?
Well,
obviously we're not going to hold you to it.
Yeah, no, it's right. Well, I can tell I'm not.
I don't want you to get 10% of the upside. Yeah.
So I always tell my members to kind of stick with what you know. So I would probably choose an area that I'm very familiar with. Around. I'm a self-managing landlord as well, like most of my members. So I would probably have it in my West London area.
Yes.
That I'm familiar with. I know like the back of my hand. I know Pastor. There we go. At one point. So I would zero around there. The other thing I'd be keeping an eye on is big infrastructure projects, something that's going to really develop and improve areas.
So HS2, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. So, the Elizabeth line and those types of things that are going to bring investment to the area.
That makes sense. Good. So in terms of getting in touch with yourself and the NRLA, how can people go about doing that?
Well, check out our website, nrla.org.uk, or drop me a line, ben@nrla.org.uk. There you go.
Fantastic. Ben, thank you for joining us on the Landlords Club podcast.
Thank you so much.